There it is. How do you guys like a little intro music? Thought you'd enjoy that. I thought some French horns sounded Oktoberfesty kind of, since we're going to be talking a little bit about some interesting German activity. I want to welcome everybody to the show. This is the Walter Bosley channel. I'm here every Sunday night, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for my live stream. And I want to welcome everyone who's, of course, in the live chat room right now. And I want to welcome all you folks who might be watching this, whether it's live or later, and you're new to the channel. Welcome to the Walter Bosley channel. If you're completely new to me, my biography's out there in places, but encapsulated, essentially, I spent 20 years in the national security community of the United States. And I left in 2006 and focused on my publishing and writing and what became my nonfiction research, which is why we're here tonight to discuss some further thoughts on that nonfiction research. I want to start with I always, if you're new here, I always go into a little pop culture, okay? And a few weeks ago, our friend Cardinal Sin gifted me this really cool Star Trek transporter mug, and I wanted to demonstrate it for you with some hot tea that I brewed before getting started here. So if this works right, let me see, the light might be, let me adjust the light here because that might be a little bright for you guys to, there we go. We'll do this by the light of the screen. I hope I don't want to spill any though. Okay, let's try this. Now, if this works right, they should beam away. Trickle, trickle, trickle. I'm doing it this way because I wanted this to be hot enough for the demonstration. Let's see if this works. Oh, it looks like it's working, right? It looks like they're beaming away. Oh, isn't that cool? Where are they beaming to? Let's see. Oh gosh, look, they're starting to appear on the other side on this other planet. But let's go back to the Enterprise transport room. Oh, look at that. They're beaming away. Isn't that cool? I love these kinds of mugs. I have a couple others that I'll demonstrate for you. I have a Houdini mug, and I have this other interesting one. Oh, there they go. Let's jump over to the other planet. Oh, they're appearing on the other planet right now. There they are. Oh, Uhura's already there. She's there first. She better be careful because she does have a red shirt on, and we know what happens to the red shirts. But there we go. Let's see. I'll lean this over just a little so I can get the rest of them. Well, I think I'm going to spill this if I go any further. But there they are, appearing on the planet. Ain't that cool? There we go. I think they're there. Isn't that cool? I want to thank Cardinal Sin for this really cool mug. And with the way the weather is out here, this is the perfect night for hot tea. So there we go. Thank you again, Cardinal Sin, for the coolest of mugs. Well, what I wanted to talk about tonight is a very interesting aspect of a fair chunk of my research, specifically my secret missions series, but also my work on breakaway civilization research, which I now refer to mostly as breakaway society, because I think civilization is just too big of a word um, for what we're talking about. And I have defined that accordingly many other places, many other times. Now, what I wanted to share tonight was a discussion on the German search for gold, particularly in South America. And the reason this interests me, those of you who have read my books will know, is this ties into my research, expanding what we know about hoping to expand what we know about the airship mystery of the 1890s, and by extension, the Sonora Aero Club mystery of the 1850s, essentially the 19th century airship saga. And of course, I argue, as you know, that Germany's search for gold, which is a well-documented historical reality, I think was enhanced by the mysterious airship organization, which I've written about and spoken about a lot. But before I comment on anything like that, let's go over the actual history of Germany's interest, or in South American gold, and the gold in South America in particular. I'm going to turn up the light there so I can see, because I'm going to be referring to, when I talk about my breakaway research, of course, I'm talking about Origin, this book here, which is available at Lulu, only at lulu.com. But I'm also going to be talking about the Burton book and Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora. But let me refer first to the Burton book, which is the second book in the Secret Missions series. It's titled The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. So now I'm going to be getting into the kinds of things that we talk about when we talk about lost civilizations, ancient mysteries, and that sort of thing. But again, I want to start with the historical aspects as well, the known data, because what I'm talking about is rooted in actual history. The question of South American gold. In my book about Burton, I asked the question, where else did the gold really come from? And I'll read bits from my book, because I think, I already wrote out some of these ideas, and they're stated better than I can do off the cuff right here. Let me get my glasses going here. Harold T. Wilkins posed the question, quoting, "A friend in Australia asked me how it is that despite the fabulous quantity of gold, we never see the shares of South American gold mines offered for sale or purchase in the columns of our financial newspapers, nor do we see financial news items about South American gold mines. I myself dissent from the view that the old Incas derived the gold by the slow and painful method of collecting chispas and dust from the surfs, or washing riverbeds and gullies. Much of it came from far older and very ancient races under the shadow of old Brazilian Atlantis." And that's from Harold T. Wilkins, that quote, in his Secret Cities of Old South America. Now let's look at that. I am probably going to butcher this name. Minas Gerais, once a center, that's in Brazil, once a center for mining, shows that only 5.5% of its GDP is in precious metals, according to 2012 numbers. For perspective, the region contributes to only 9% of the Brazilian economy, so that 5.5% is even smaller than it looks. I'm going to turn on more light here so I can see this better. The next time South America appears on a list of historic gold rushes is in the 1880s with the Tierra del Fuego period. It was another 90 years before Brazil experienced a short rush, followed by an Amazon rush in the following decade, and then again in the 2000s. In 2011, Peru was the world's sixth largest producer of gold at 5.37%. Venezuela is in gold mining today. That's from the World Gold Council right there, that information. Okay. Now, basically, what we're talking about here is there's supposedly so much gold, in South America, from South America, and yet it wasn't really registering on the gold market records and data sheets the way people who know about this stuff, thought it should be. So I asked the question in my book. It wasn't until the present decade of this writing, this book, in 2015, that major South American gold mines have shown up. But do these answer the mystery as to where all the gold came from during or especially prior to the conquest era? Okay. Now, the Encyclopedia of the Incas, which is a 2015 book, Urton and von Hagen are the authors. The Encyclopedia of the Incas states that 50% to 80% of Inca sites in northwest Argentina and northern Chile were associated with mining or metallurgical activities. In looking closer at the structure of Inca civilization, we learn that gold was indeed important enough to them that it was paid as tribute to overlords. Did the lost civilization or even the Inca simply mine what it took us centuries to find in South America? Okay, were they just simply gold miners themselves? It is possible, but the modern mines are recent finds, okay? They're not some so-called lost mining operations of the ancients were never found, all right? Although many Inca mines were. Now, what do I mean by that? The mines that were worked prior to the Incas, to the Inca, okay? Prior to the Inca. The Inca were there during the Spanish conquest era. This was the elder ones before them. Those mines were never found. Some people would say, well, that's because they didn't exist. Okay, that's possible. We have to acknowledge that's possible. But they were talked about having existed. And remember, the question is there a discrepancy between the gold that was reported historically and the sources that are known to have produced gold? See, that's the problem. There is a discrepancy to be argued there. The gold that was taken or mined was still alleged to be a small amount in comparison with what the Inca claimed existed. All right. Now, I'm going to continue reading on in these parts. Spanish galleons laden with gold lost only 10% of that gold to English piracy. Okay? Only 10% to English pirates. What Francis Drake once captured, of that, he gave to Queen Elizabeth, who paid off England's national debt at the time. You hear what I said? Only 10% was captured by English pirates. And the amount that Drake, he didn't give her that whole 10%, but the amount that he gave her out of that 10% paid off England's national debt at the time. That's how much gold we're talking about here, okay? Spain came away with, let me see what that number is there, 181 tons of gold between 1500 and 1650 AD alone. 181 tons. All right. Now, the source is Tejvan Pettinger, Economics Help, What Happened to the Spanish Gold from the Incas. Okay, published in 2013. If all of that was mined gold, why didn't the Spanish find the veins in all the time they were there? Okay, they were looking for it. Would the relatively primitive mining technology of the ancient Inca really have produced the 181 tons that Spain came away with and more? That's the question I ask in the greater question of this book. Okay. Why didn't England, Germany, the United States, or any other nation with active interests in South America, for example, find these gold resources following the end of the conquest era and before the 21st century? Now, think about that. At the end of the conquest era, several other countries, got in there, and none of them to this day have found all these sources of the gold that was reported. Okay. So it's that's a whole separate question about the technology. But tonight we're talking about the German interest, and I'm getting to that. I'm just giving you the background of gold in South America, and within the context of all of what we're going to talk about. Now, here we have some more numbers. Even all the modern gold mining in South American nations combined hasn't answered that question. South America still stands behind the gold production of China, Australia, Russia, Canada, and the United States. Okay. It has not matched South Africa's period of having produced 79% of the world's gold from 1799 to the 20th century. Though Peru, Brazil, and Chile are among the top 20 gold producers of the world, the combined output of the three nations equals in total only the 270 tons produced by Australia alone. And that's from, folks, the USGS 2014 to 2015 stats, and Piero Scaruffi, who did the Latin American timeline in 2008. Okay? Now, think about that. Now, one could argue that, well, that's because, Spain came away with all there was. Okay, you could argue that, and that would be interesting if true, but we don't know. Now, quoting, okay, this is from a conquest era writer, Cieza de Leon, quoting, "If all the gold that is buried in Peru were collected, it would be impossible to coin it, so great the quantity. And yet the Spaniards of the conquest got very little compared with what remains. The Indians said, 'The treasure is so concealed that even we ourselves know not the hiding place.'" End quote. Okay? That's interesting. Okay? That's real interesting. That a writer who was a contemporary with the conquest, documented that. Now, some could argue, well, of course, that was the thinking at the time, and that's why they had the gold lust and continued chasing after it. But it is interesting nonetheless. Now, I go on in my book to make a pretty bold speculation, but that's not what tonight is about. Let me get to make sure I covered what I want to cover in this. And I think I have. Okay. So there's a little context on the gold situation. Now, this is what was out there. This is what, is known factually, some basic data on gold in South America. So we know if the Spanish came away with 181 tons of it, we know there was a lot of it, okay? And if the story was that they didn't get all of it and there was more to be found, any nation, including the Germans, would be interested in going to get it. Now, why? Why would the Germans even care about going to South America for gold? Well, let me dip into Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, and share that with you. Okay? Here we go. Okay. Regarding Inca gold, in my book, I say there is evidence that the Germans would have been interested in looking for it. And that is, German colonies were established there in the Andes. Specifically, I'm talking about Bariloche. German colonies were established there as early as 1827. However, German immigration into Argentina began in earnest between 1870 and 1914. Now, remember, everything before 1870 were technically Prussian immigrants, okay? Because the Germany as we know it were a bunch of separate states. There wasn't unified Germany through most of the 19th century. Okay. Go back to what I wrote here. The era of the German gold mark currency spanned from 1871 to 1914, the exact period of this German Argentine immigration. Okay. Gold mark currency. Germany went on the gold standard in 1871. Now, a fresh new Germany, a unified Germany, okay, the German nation as we know it today. So they put their currency on the gold standard. Therefore, they needed gold and sources of it. It's right there in the facts. That comes from various historical sources. That the era of the German gold mark currency spanned 1871 to 1914, the exact period of German immigration into Argentina. Okay. Now, that information also comes from Germany and the Americas, Culture, Politics, and History, a multidisciplinary encyclopedia by Thomas Adam and Will Kaufman. Okay. So these are not things I'm pulling out of a lost civilization book or out of the air. Now, from the Encyclopedia of Money, we're talking about, again, we're establishing why would the Germans want to go into South America and make such a big effort, or did they, to get the gold? This is from the Encyclopedia of Money. Quoting, on 4 December 1871, the German Reichstag enacted monetary legislation, the first three sections of which read, or read, number 1, there shall be coined an imperial gold coin, 139 and a half pieces of which shall contain 1 pound of pure gold. 2, the 10th of this gold coin shall be called a mark and shall be divided into 100 pfennig. 3, besides the imperial gold coin of 10 marks, there shall be coined imperial gold coins of 20 marks, of which 69 and 3/4 pieces shall contain 1 pound of pure gold. Okay. Now, on 9 July 1873, the Reichstag took action that officially put Germany on a gold standard. The first section of the act read, in place of the various local standards now current in Germany, a national gold standard will be established. Its monetary unit is the mark, as established in Section 2 of the law dated 4 December 1871. Now, this comes from, let me get the source there again for you. And, okay. It's from an author named Laughlin, 1968. But what I want to do is give you the exact book here. And gosh, well, it's somewhere in my footnotes in the book, but it's Laughlin, 1968, the Encyclopedia of Money. Okay? That's the book. Okay, so a war indemnity that Germany extracted from France after the Franco-Prussian War helped furnish the gold reserves that enabled Germany to adopt the gold standard. Germany also began selling silver to bolster its gold holdings. Either Germany correctly saw the coming of the gold standard, was only acting in step with the times, or perhaps the commercial success of England had elevated the prestige of the gold standard in the eyes of Germany. So Germany sought to be on the gold standard like all the rest of the Western world, the powers of the Western world. And here's what's interesting that I would like to point out. The era of the gold standard spanned both the exact years of that first German immigration into South America and the great airship mystery. Okay? The great airship mystery of the 1890s falls, and that was just in the United States, folks. You will see that there was more airship stuff going on before that one in the Americas in the 1890s. But interesting little facts there. Let's go on. Now this I'm reading this from my book. As I said, because the rest of the civilized world was also on the gold standard, imagine how that affected the availabilities of the sources. Okay, all these different countries are out there looking for this gold. Competition was high. Okay, with the gold rush of Tierra del Fuego, okay, which was this is from Railways of the Far South. This information, okay. Tierra del Fuego Gold Rush 1880 to 1910, which is patbrit.org. Okay. Let me get back to where I was. With the gold rush of Tierra del Fuego, the German bankers that I identify in my work with this Nimza group, which you regulars are familiar with, had to be aware of gold in that archipelago at the southernmost tip of South America. This rush, worked mostly by Chileans, Argentines, and Europeans, spanned from 1883 to 1906. Okay. And those of you who know about my work on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid will find those years, a chunk of those years, very interesting. You're about to find them even more interesting. So let me jump ahead here to, and I think that's what I wanted to share from that, was just more of the data on the immigration. So I think it's pretty well established that Germany had historically had an actual documented reason for needing the gold and for wanting the gold. So we can safely say Germany went down there for the gold. Now, let me jump into here. Most of my writing about the subject of Germany in Latin America and South America in particular, as I said, relates to my airship mystery research. And I find in this actual history of their presence a good foundation of corroboration of any until now unknown or classified activities down there. Now, with it established that there was historically so much gold pulled out of there, and yet there remains this discrepancy between what was pulled out of there in the past and what has been found since the end of the Spanish conquest era. It kind of suggests that somebody's keeping something quiet, something secret about gold sources in South America. And I remembered my cough button. And that's where we find margin for some speculative ideas. Okay. Remember, at the Walter Bosley channel, it's not a sin to discuss speculative ideas. Okay. This is how we grow in our understanding of of mysteries that are left behind in history, okay, or even the questions we have outside of history, be it in philosophy or what have you, okay, is that we think outside the box, we let ourselves think outside the box and discuss outside the box. We don't get, you know, our little feelings hurt by discussing concepts that may seem wild or out of our personal philosophy. All right, we discuss the wild things here. We ask the wild, bold questions about these things. Certainly, I do in my work, and that's what I do here with this issue of, you know, what exactly were the Germans doing in South America, you know, and that encompasses subjects even beyond looking for gold. The gold isn't the only thing they were doing down there, not by a long shot. So you have to ask yourself what kind of classified things were going on that the Germans were doing. We know we were doing classified things down there. We know the British were, certainly the French. So, you know, what were the Germans doing, and particularly during this airship mystery era? Now, you guys know also that I'm a nugget of truth guy. I, for one, have long ago rejected, after much research, much study, and much thought on this, okay, I've rejected the notion that the 1890s airship mystery was nothing but an April Fool's joke. Okay, considering that the sightings started in the fall of the year, months away from April 1st, the people who argue that it was all an April Fool's joke have clearly not read the material, not studied it. They're just, you know, what can we say about materialist reductionists? It makes them feel more comfortable. Okay, a lot of times they're right, of course, but you know, you can't really, as easy as it is to do, you can't just adopt an attitude and assume you're going to be right about every situation. You can't do it. It's very tempting to do with ufology, I can tell you that. You're allowed to do that where flat Earth is concerned, okay? Because I'm sorry, that's just so patently ridiculous and absurd that you are allowed to just adopt an attitude about that. I'll let you hear. So, you know, so again, when I look at classified things the Germans may have been doing down in South America, not only do I look at, you know, which gold sources they were looking for, I go into how they might have been looking for it, with whom they might have been looking for it. You know, how creative did they get with the technology? And I think that technology, like I said, nugget of truth, I think that technology very likely, I always say it, I could be wrong, but right now, based on the years of research I've done and looking at it, I'm of the mind that technology they were developing on the secret, classified, sensitive end of it included going after controlled flight. I think there was a nugget of truth to the airship mysteries. I don't think that any of the airship mystery vehicles of the 19th century that are reported were from extraterrestrial sources, other planets. I just don't. Okay, and I think that's obvious from the reports. Okay, people latch on. You guys know that people latch on to the extraterrestrial thing because one guy that was around Aurora when it happened, in one of the newspaper accounts says, you know, that the burned body of the pilot looks like a spaceman. He looked like a spaceman. By golly, he looked like a spaceman. And of course, the ET people just run with that. They run with that. You know, in my opinion, what they're running with is they're running with a fumbled ball in the wrong direction. But hey, you know, let them believe what they want. You know, So yeah, so I think that the group that I talk about in my writings, that Delshow tells us about, a guy named Charles Delshow, the group called Nimza, I see where they very much would have and could have, if they existed, if we're right about this, those of us who think this, would have and could have gone down to South America and enlisted the airships in looking for the gold. But that's on the wild end of the spectrum. What I've shared with you so far are hard facts about the Germans, why they would have been interested in gold, why they would have had the need for the gold, and why they would have gone down there to look for it, and that they did go down there and they were there. Okay, decades before the Prussian states unified and the new Germany went on the gold standard. Okay, we're talking more than a century before the World War II era. They were down there in Bariloche and these other places. Most people think of the German connection to South America as merely what went on after World War II, during and after World War II. No, they had a stronghold down there for a century, longer than a century, by the time the World War II era Nazi elites had to flee, or whether they were elite or not, refugee Nazis had to flee there. So you should know and understand the history of Germany with South America. Now, I want you to think about it before you say, well, that Walter, he's gone into this airship thing and he talks about this weird stuff. I just don't know. Think about the interests of Heinrich Himmler and members of the Thule Society and, the other occult history minded members of that party, and particularly Heinrich Himmler sending archaeologists and anthropologists all over the world and, looking for all the strange things. Well, I'm telling you, looking for lost mines of the civilization predating the Inca, that's something that would have interested Heinrich Himmler and the other, gang of bastards he was with, right? So let me return here. To emphasize, it's a T-O, not a T-A or T-U-H, to emphasize the connection between archaeology and the German presence and perhaps, the search for the gold and the lost mines. We can go to, for example, Mexico. Now, through a good half of the 19th century, American archaeologists were down there, British archaeologists were in Mexico, and German archaeologists as well. And many of these guys were intelligence agents for their respective countries. So what you had all over Mexico were a bunch of intelligence spies, okay, who also happen to be archaeologists. And their cover for keeping an eye on each other was the archaeology. Okay, as we got closer to the 20th century, Germany's landlocked. They don't have sources of oil, so they were getting their oil from Mexico. And naturally, as we got closer and closer to world conflict in the early 20th century, we were keeping an eye, we meaning the British and the United States, were keeping an eye on German activities, particularly during World War I, or as I said, the years leading up to it, because England got their oil from Mexico as well, and Germany was interested in getting the oil, and this was going on long before World War I. Okay, the direct German interest in Mexico, and it wasn't just oil, and it wasn't just archaeology. It's also, a no-brainer that any German interest in Mexico would include a proximity to the borders of the United States, okay, for any future strategic purposes. And when we talk about Hammer Schacht and what he did in the Third Reich era, with essentially this transporting Germany around the world Okay. He got the idea, okay, from medieval era Junkers. Okay. Um, it wasn't an original idea with him. This is what Germany was doing down in South America, South America, Central America, and Mexico as well, was essentially this Junkers transplantation invasion method. Okay. But let's get back to now. Again, let's go to the history of it, because my research on this, I want to emphasize, is steeped in the actual history. Okay. Um, Now, as you know, there was Maximilian. Let's go back to this. When Emperor Maximilian came into power in 1864, Prussian influence in Mexico seemed to notch up. The emperor was the brother of Austrian Emperor Francis Joseph I. He was also a naval officer and teamed up with Napoleon III of France to invade Mexico and to revive French power in the Americas. England and Spain got in on the deal, but that didn't last long when they learned of the French plan to seize the entire country of Mexico. All this intrigue resulted in Maximilian being crowned as a cutout for the French in this case. His Belgian wife even changed her name to Carlota. But by 1867, France opted to maintain a relationship with the United States and dropped its imperial designs on Latin America. And Maximilian was captured and executed by the new Mexican regime. That's the known history, well known about that. Now, I go on to say, despite the French Maximilian political theater, German immigration continued into Mexico, with many colonies forming in places like Veracruz, Tamaulipas, as well as Chiapas, and in the Yucatan. Much German cultural influence took root and remains today. Okay, and we know this. This is a well-known thing. But I say there was more to it than just the political intrigues that we know of. Okay, and this goes into this idea of transplanting Germany to foreign lands as a means of invasion. What you do is you put your people there, you root your industry there, you ingratiate yourself with the local nation, okay, the local culture or whatever, and you kind of buddy up to them to get your hands on their resources, and then at some point you begin to influence the social structure. Then you influence things like education and the press, and then ultimately the government of where you're at. And pretty soon you have the controlling influence. And the idea is you take over that way. You can either just, make it clear to them that you're in charge now, you can control them, and they go along with it. Or if they're not going to go along with it, then you've buddied up to their rivals or their enemies. And so you turn your energies to getting the enemies to attack them. And then you side with the enemy. That's the Junkers way. That is the Prussian way. That was the German way. Okay. In the era that we're talking about here. And, yeah. And I mentioned Halmer Schacht. Okay. Joseph Farrell writes about this in The Third Way, the Nazi International, European Union, and Corporate Fascism, published in 2015. We read of Halmer Schacht's supply-side scheme of export production by developing lesser nations through the exportation of physical German industrial plants. Schacht's specific plan involved loaning these underdeveloped countries the money needed to expand their industry and agriculture, and said countries would in turn spend that money on German machinery and materials to support this new expansion. In other words, Germany gives a country some money, and they give it back through establishment of German-built industry. Okay? Now, I say Schacht was a student of what had already been done, was already being done in the United States by Kuhn Loeb. Now, Kuhn Loeb were German-born bankers in the United States. At one point, they owned 67% of all the physical railway, of the physical tracks of the railroads Okay, they owned 67% of it. They were the kings of the rail barons. All right, and they were stretching out into Latin America. Okay, the Prussian presence, I'll read again from my book. The Prussian presence in Mexico saw the rise of German immigration in that country and, as discussed, the appearance of a German industry there. But this also happened throughout South America. German immigrants carried industry into Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. In 1843, Colonia Tovar was founded in Venezuela by immigrants from the Duchy of Baden. Okay, and they even to this day maintain a German culture and German architecture and all that. They have a sister city, Oxapampa, which is in the Peruvian highlands, established in 1891. And, you know, there are several others. Okay, now, Kuhn Loeb, they were involved in establishing railroads in South America. Okay, and their boy, who they essentially owned, was E.H. Harriman, who owned the Union Pacific Railroad. Now, he had borrowed the money he needed to buy the Union Pacific from Kuhn Loeb. Okay, and he went on to kind of be a guy who would facilitate the establishment of these railroads. Now, think about it. If you find the sources of gold, you need to transport that gold to your ships, because we're talking the 19th and the early 20th century. All right. So you need to be able to load that gold up on trains and transport it to the port cities. Okay. So here we have Kuhn Loeb, the German immigrant American bankers, who I discuss at length in this book. Okay. And what I think was their involvement in the airship mystery and what Germany was really doing, as I put it, down in South America. Okay. You have them involved in this. You have E.H. Harriman. And again, as you know, I write about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and At a Place within the context of what we're talking about. And I've done some very recent things that made some recent finds. I'm not allowed to talk about this. I'm not at liberty to discuss this yet because of a media project in development right now. So we won't discuss the details of that part, but we know of their connection to E.H. Harriman. And I lay out in my books here, okay, the Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, and Origin. Much of those details as I knew them by 2015. I know a lot more now, which will be coming out soon enough. And this overlaps. Okay. That was interesting. This overlaps with the airship mystery and the archaeologists all over Mexico and South America. And if they were looking for the sources of gold prior to the Inca, remember, the Inca talked about the sources of gold that King Atahualpa had, okay? They didn't know where this came from, okay? They didn't know. In fact, King Atahualpa's wife allegedly hides the source of gold in the ancient tunnel system. Okay. Now I had another point in here that I want to get to. And that's the whole Kuhn Loeb thing. Okay. Oh, that was, I'm sorry, 64% of all the railroad miles in the United States, not 67. Now, to give you some context of what Kuhn Loeb was involved with, okay, not only railroads, which if you're familiar with our friend Sechery, he talks about how the railroads were well aware of the telluric current system running through the ground, right? So here's Kuhn Loeb involved. They're the kings of all the rail barons. Certainly they must have known something about this. But here's another thing about Kuhn Loeb. Kuhn Loeb financed Westinghouse during the years of Nikola Tesla's association with that company. Now think of Tesla technology. So here you have Kuhn Loeb controlling essentially railroads in America that are, it's argued that they're connected with the telluric current. And then you have Kuhn Loeb financing Westinghouse, specifically the Nikola Tesla technology developed by Westinghouse. Who was Kuhn Loeb interested in this kind of stuff for? It certainly wasn't just profits. Profits, of course, are going to be involved in that. But I think there's more going on there. Ultimately, I argue that Kuhn Loeb were working for Germany. They were working for German interests despite being American bankers. Okay, here we go. Talk about Kuhn Loeb's connection, the German connection to South America via Kuhn Loeb, in my opinion. Also interesting is that Kuhn Loeb later partnered with J.P. Morgan in a purchase of $50 million notes of the Argentine Republic, and then a $30 million loan, $50 million of notes, I think, of the Argentine Republic, and then a $30 million loan to Argentine State Railways. Okay, in the early days of World War I, prior to the U.S. entering it. So going headlong into the 20th century, Kuhn Loeb is still in there getting their piece of South America, I say, on behalf of clandestine German interests. And this transaction alone demonstrates their interest in Argentina in particular. So it's clear that Germany was in South America looking for gold, okay? With the historical sources on that, much of that is obvious. But what is not obvious? Well, I think what's not obvious has to do with archaeology and the airship mystery, okay? Now, for those of you who don't want to talk about the airship mystery, you're in the wrong place. But let's set that aside for now. Let's just talk about the gold sources. Why must we assume that nobody was mining gold before documented history tells us they were? Okay. Especially in South America, when there's so much mystery surrounding the gold. What would Germany have found adjacent to their gold hunt? Now, if they were looking for the original pre-Inca sources of gold, that implies that there was somebody mining it, and the Inca tell us that it was, these ancient ones that they didn't really claim to know much about. So you would have archaeologists involved, you would have to, in this hunt for this pre-Inca gold of the lost ancient, the mysterious ancient ones. And what else might you find? Well, you might find lost cities, right? You might find the source of the ancient tunnel legend. Okay. Now remember, again, I'm a nugget of truth guy. Okay. You can't take things on face value, but what you can do is not throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, don't just completely disregard something until after you've given sufficient look at it. And my exception, we all do it. Mine is the flat earth thing. I'm sorry. I looked at it. Yeah, that one, there is no baby in that bathwater. Okay. But look at Tartaria, for instance. I think there might be something in there, so I don't completely dismiss those Tartaria fellows, And I've told them that. You guys have heard me say that. So we have to wonder what the German archaeologists might have found. Is this what the German presence in South America really became what it was about? Not just the gold, or did they find the pre-Inca sources of gold of the so-called lost ancient ones? Could they have found that? Could that be, let's get a little wild now, could that source of the gold be what finances the so-called Nazi International of Joseph Farrell, of his works, his hypothetical Nazi International, which I'm being nice to the skeptics out there. It's a little more than hypothetical when you look at the evidence. You guys know what I think about it. I think there is indeed some type of post-World War II Nazi International thing going on. But think about it. Finding the pre-Inca sources of gold, if it's a rich source with essentially, so to speak, an endless supply, think about how then they could finance their operation, whatever that is. Think how they could finance a breakaway technology, okay? Simply by having their hands on the source of the gold of the pre-Inca ancient ones. Now, I admit, in my Burton book, I get pretty wild as to what my bold speculation is. I argue that, oh, look, they beamed off the planet and they're back on the Enterprise. I don't argue it. I propose a possibility. I suggest a possibility and lay it out in the Burton book. Let me see. Oh, here we go. This book here. Okay. That I asked the question, what if these pre-Inca guys, this civilization, what if they had the knowledge of actually making gold from the resources of the earth, the material resources? What if they understood what we call that alchemical process? What if they did it on an industrial scale? Think about that. Now, in one of his books, David Childress goes into the idea that Tiwanaku and Pumapunku might have been places where gold was processed. In other words, the gold that was gathered, the gold that was mined, were brought to these places, and this is where it was, washed and refined and, put into ingots, whatever. It was a gold processing center. I take it farther. What if it was a machine that made gold? Think about this in terms of the legend. The Inca swore to the Spanish, we don't know where all this ancient gold, of the old ones came from. We don't know their sources of gold. We don't know where their mines were. And yet they had access to a seemingly endless supply. They, clearly the Spanish, between whatever little mining they did, but mostly what they captured, came away with 181 tons of the stuff. And yet post-conquest explorers have never found the mines of, any serious evidence of mines to answer for all that gold. Well, then there's the legend of Atahualpa and how his wife took the gold and hid it in the tunnels, and yet nobody's ever found in a particular tunnel, and no one's ever found the ancient tunnel. Well, what if that's a metaphor? What if they just knew where to look for the geological conditions conducive to accelerating the natural process of making gold. And what if they had this knowledge? And what if that's what Pumapunku was? A gold manufacturing site. Now, suppose, just go with me, okay? Go with me. I know it hurts and kills you materialist reductionist skeptics. You're just, oh my God, you're just hating this. But again, you're in the wrong place to begin with. So imagine that that's possible. Now think about German archaeologists who had been there since the early 19th century. Remember, we had the one place established in 1827. German archaeologists all over South America, looking for the source of this. What if one of them discovered that secret? What if one of them discovered that the ancient old ones, pre-Inca, made their gold through a geological process with an advanced understanding of the process? Now, if you're wondering, what the hell's he talking about? I refer you to Sechery's The Handprint of Atlas. He talks specifically about this, okay? The conditions, the thing about the Hodge and how the 1849 gold rush of California was a staged event, because what Fremont knew going out there already was they knew where the earth made the gold, so they could go right to that. They knew how to find it because they knew how to read the terrain. Now, again, think about that. If somebody who knew how to read the terrain could find the places in the earth where it makes the gold, okay, that's being able to read the terrain and the telluric currents, right? If you're familiar with Sechery. And what did I say about Kuhn Loeb? They were the kings of the rail barons. They were the masters of the they weren't railroad men themselves, but come on, the railroad men were their puppets. Okay, a guy like E.H. Harriman and his engineers and stuff, they also knew how to read the terrain. So Kuhn Loeb has at their disposal the railroad guys who knew how to read the terrain with the telluric current, and there they are building railroads and going down to South America, in Argentina in particular. So you had Kuhn Loeb, I argue, were involved in the early stages of what the German archaeologists were looking for or had found, and their job was to provide the rails, if they could, to the places near where these ancient gold machines were, gold producing machines, so to speak. That means the particular mountain ranges. Oh, gee, the Andes, perhaps, right? So, yeah, I say that when you look at the industrialists and the scientists of pre-unification Germany in the 19th century, and then particularly post-unification Germany, post-unified Germany, and these are historical guys, okay? When you look at them and their achievements, their industrial achievements, and their interests in these esoteric subjects, you got to wonder. Let me jump to Origin real quick to demonstrate what I just said. These industrialists who are into this stuff. I present a whole list of what I call suspects. Okay, here they are. Okay, I list, for instance, these German industrialists that I'm talking about would have been involved and were involved in these countries. Karl Reichenbach. He lived from 1788 to 1869. He was a chemist, a geologist, a metallurgist, an industrialist, and philosopher member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences. Okay? He's ideally, one of these guys. I also write here, the fact that he was a geologist and a chemist. I mean, think about that. Guys like that would have been definitely involved in what Sechery talks about is, finding where the gold is processed naturally, being able to recognize it. And remember, he was a philosopher member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences. That means he was a philosopher scientist ally. Okay. And we know what the British Royal Societies did in 1830 to these guys, right? In England. They let the materialist reductionist bean counter dweebs take over. We also have another German industrialist, Friedrich Waniek, lived from 1838 to 1919, a producer of iron, an engineering industrialist. Waniek's life spanned the era that this book's thesis covers. He was 17 years old when Delschau says the Sonora Aero Club emerged. Waniek ascended to leadership in industry during the expansion of Germany into South America, which also spanned the rise of the rival America, blah, blah, blah. That has a different subject. Waniek also was a contemporary of German mystics who would be instrumental in 20th century German politics and inspire the early Nazis. Okay? So Friedrich Waniek, is one of them as well. Here we have Karl Kellner. Okay, he lived from 1851 to 1905. Kellner had the practical qualifications. He was a chemist and an inventor, applying his skills to industry. But it may be that Kellner founded the legendary and infamous Ordo Templi Orientis, wherein we find his most important contribution to Nimza and German, secret objectives in its organizational culture. The Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO as it's better known, was founded sometime between 1895 to 1906. Okay. And then, of course, the later we have Walter Rathenau, born in 1867, lived to 1922. This guy was a whopper among these industrialists. Okay, Rathenau was an engineer who effectively applied his knowledge and skills in chemistry to German industry in the late 19th century and into the 20th. He was, like the others before him, a philosopher-scientist. Okay, he was the foreign minister of Germany in 1922 when he forged an agreement known as the Treaty of Rapallo with the Russians, which restored diplomatic relations between the two nations. Walter Rathenau blazed the trail that would ultimately give the Nazis their material power. Ironically, 2 months after signing the Treaty of Rapallo, which gave Germany back its teeth, German nationalist radicals opposed to the disarmament imposed by Versailles assassinated Rathenau, the man who made it possible for Germany to rise from its ashes. Rathenau is also involved with the company that reportedly engineered the bell, the mysterious bell, and Hammerschacht and so forth. So as you see, just the lives of those guys, and there were many more German industrialists out there, but just the lives of those guys covers, the entire 19th century and well into the 20th century, this era we're talking about. And all of them had some personal interest in and connection to very esoteric technologies and occult sciences. So these are the kind of guys that would have really been turned on by the idea of finding the lost old ones and their gold and their sources of gold. And if it turns out to be possible, some incredible understanding of, a geological understanding with an advanced lost technology, lost to us, unknown to us, in the actual alchemical process of gold making by the earth itself, and perhaps the old pre-Inca technology, which could accelerate that process. So the German hunt for gold was a very real thing. I know I rattled off and read a bunch of seemingly dry stuff, but it's very important to show you that this isn't just completely out of the ether, conspiracy theory thing. They were there, and these kinds of people that would be interested in these wild esoteric things that I suggest, they were involved in it firsthand. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share tonight. We have a fair amount of time to get into questions. I would like to start with questions about what I talked about tonight, okay? And then when we exhaust those sufficiently, we can go to general questions. So let me see. So I'm open for questions from the live chat or Any other source that can get them to Malia? The Webmeister. Let's do. Okay, here's a question from Jughound. Did they not find red mercury underneath? That's not on that. When you say they, and I've been talking about the Germans, you mean the Germans? I'm sorry, I'm being facetious there. Again, I ask for now, please keep the questions on what I've been talking about initially, okay? But to answer your question, Jughound, or to respond to it, okay? Red mercury, that's in the realm of it's still somewhat a myth, okay? Red mercury, that's questionable enough, and finding it under the you mean the Great Pyramids, I'm not aware of. Now, the Mexican pyramid in Teotihuacan, they found regular silver mercury. I believe traces of it. So I'm on to the next question. No, Soulite, I'm talking about stuff drawing from, in light of recent research I've done, I wanted to talk about stuff that, is from multiple books already out there. Origin, Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, and Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of Sir Richard Francis Burton. Next question. Let me see. I think I can turn this one off now. As a German living in Mexico and Tepoztlan, I would like to know your personal view on the frequent phenomena here appearing since the 50s in huge German. Be more specific about which phenomena you're talking about. If you're talking about the UFOs, I forgot to go into, because this wasn't an airship mystery discussion, but I had a section in here where I talk about, in Origin, I talk about the airship sightings in South America between the 1860s and the 1890s airship mystery. And I argue that that was German-sourced airships, by the way. You know what? I'll talk about that another time. I'm sorry. I meant to include that, but I just really wanted to stick with, as far as phenomena in Mexico, the modern UFO phenomena, these days, so much stuff gets faked or exaggerated or such that it's hard to tell what's real. So where I'm at right now is I have no answer for that question because I'm skeptical of a lot of stuff. And are these questions that are coming up and disappear? Okay. Now remember, folks, I forgot this little rule myself. Do as Mike and try to leave the question up here long enough for me to see it. As Mike Jones has done, put at Walter Bosley or at Walter, or put it in all caps. That way I'll know it's a question for me or a comment for me. Okay. And Mike Jones asks, what is it that makes gold so intrinsically valuable, i.e. the gold standard? You'll have to ask somebody who's a gold expert. It's the properties of gold. It's the, how difficult it is to get it. You'll have to ask somebody who's, I'm not a technical gold guy. It's just, we just know, right? Modwiz 125 says monatomic gold consumption by Anuna types might underlie the importance of gold. I think only 66% of weight remains after reduction. Okay. UFO, yes. Yeah, Masters Maniac Mexico. It's kind of it's when you're talking UFOs now, specifically within the context of what I was talking about. If you're going back a while and you're talking about the airship mystery stuff, I can have a more intelligent or a more satisfying answer, you know, to that. But the modern UFO stuff, it's not that it's not an intelligence, and it's not intelligent to say that a lot of it is just, you know, a fair portion turns out to be BS. But as far as what's not BS in the modern stuff going on over cities in Mexico, I will say this. I do think drone type of technology, techno surveillance, you know, machinery, technology, to be redundant. I think this has been tested over the Mexican cities. I do. You know, in the cases you can point to where it's not something that was being hoaxed, I think you could argue when you look at it, and it has been argued, that it's probably some type of advanced technology. Somebody's, you know, flying over the cities. Yes, to get a reaction. Esoteric Gold says, okay, that's not to me. At Walter Bosley, the at symbol to Walter, or all caps, and then I'll know you're talking to me. Any questions about tonight's topic from the live chat? Or what I want to start doing is a way where people who are watching this live, who may not be in the live chat, can ask questions. Because I understand a lot of times the live chat is for, you know, having different discussions on different topics. So, okay, well, I'll take that as a no. So I'll take general questions now. Thanks, Brian. That will be interesting. Larry Jackson says, would Nimza use religious movements to hide its activities like the Mennonite? I don't see why not, Larry. From the perspective of, would they have Mennonite agents who happen to be Mennonites for how useful they could be in that community, or would they use Mennonite communities and embed agents in? Yeah, either way, I think they certainly could have, and I think they would have. So that's interesting. I never thought about that. Masters Made in Mexico, and it says, and yes, I was referring to long-term phenomena that are already part of the rural mythology. Yeah, I would say that when you're talking, if it's like classic airship stuff, Masters, I think there might be something to those, because the airship stuff was going on, you know, right upstairs, right in North America. And much of it centered around Texas, a very large state with bordering and with a history with Mexico, right? So why not? And other phenomena, you know, you're talking to a guy who is into all that stuff, so I'm inclined to, you know, think, ooh, there's something to it, and let's learn more. But I'm not afraid if I find where something appears to be not true or BS, I'll call it that. But I'm open to the discussion of it. Oh, and by the way, I wanted to address, I kind of fumbled the ball on my job last Sunday. Really, I was hoping the discussion would have been more on what the topic was, and that was, you know, a little bit more focused on Joshua Cutchin's book, what was in the book, and the particular chapter that we were supposed to discuss. I was hoping the discussion would be a little bit more focused on what was in the book, and it wasn't. It meandered, and that's my fault. I should have, you know, had, you know, 3 or 4 questions to keep things on that specific track, and I didn't. Citizen Quasar, I see your question now. So were you asking the question before I opened it up to questions? Which I'll politely remind you now that you have to wait till I open up to questions, but henceforth you should know that, okay, going forward. So re-ask your question. You're going to have to. I'm not scrolling. It's not practical here. So anyway, going back to last week, I was not expecting that we wouldn't stay on subject, on topic. So mea culpa. I was kind of caught unawares that it would go that way. And I have no problem with anyone. I have no problem with disagreeing with someone who I have on, or I talk about with things. No problem at all with disagreeing. I was my issue about last week was that we didn't stay on topic, and I kind of let that happen. So, I won't let that happen in the future. When I tell you I'm going to talk about something, we're gonna stay on track, and I intend to discuss Joshua's schedule, talking about Joshua's book again, because really I kind of shortchanged you guys wanting to hear that discussion, and in him, he was watching. So I will revisit his book again. Definitely, it's worth it. And whether I or you, the viewer, or whoever, whatever guest I have, if I have a guest on that one, agrees with the spirit of it, or the claims of it, that's immaterial. We will discuss what's in the book. So you guys know me. I'm willing to discuss things. Brian Smith asks Walter, says, Walter, you did your best to stay on topic. Hope to hear about Ecology of Souls sometime soon. You will. I want to talk about this book. So I will reschedule that again. So must be a fascinating conversation going on in the live chat right now. Must be solving the world's problems. Okay. Anyway, as you know, there was a little, you might not know this, there was a little glitch. Michael Woods, McCausland, I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to go into that right now, Michael. I'm saving that, as I said, for something coming up. But to what I knew up till 2015, that's in my books. So definitely, Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, and Origin. Okay, that went fat. Okay. Not a lot of people are a fan of Carl Jung. I tend to like the Jungian perspective. I find him to be interesting in the fact that he was open to what we would call, strange things, what other, like Freudian and traditional psychologists, I guess, I'm not an expert in this, would call weird and stuff. And I appreciate that. And I think there's a lot to be said about the Jungian perspective on what's in Joshua's book. But unfortunately, we didn't really get into that as deeply as I intended to. So, oh, well, Brian, that's why there's these are good on recordings. I'm sorry you missed it live, but and folks, I'm going to experiment with the time that I do this, by the way, because I don't want to alienate folks, a whole bunch of folks that, this is the dead of night for them. But, somewhere in the world, it's going to be, a bad hour, no matter what time I do this. So, you keep that in mind, and I'll keep in mind what I can do to bring you guys back into the live fold, those of you who miss it. Where do I think you mean the airships? They could have been built anywhere. I mean, Delshow talks about the Sonora Aero Club using barns in on select farms in Tuolumne County. That's where they could build them in private. And if you've got a big spread of land and you build a barn, which would have been the early concept of what we call a hangar, well, nobody sees what you're doing inside that building, right? You could even do it in caves. Look, during World War II, the German use of caves and tunnels. Okay, so caves and tunnels, another good place where these airships could have been built. Mion Torres asks, a German guy was living under Big Rock. Was he connected to the hunt for treasure? Not the hunt that I'm talking about tonight. I don't think. I mean, he might have been independently, but unless other evidence pops up, no. Max W. Lytle says it's still unclear to me what happened to the airships after the 1890s in the U.S. Well, yeah, that's the big hole in my, and I admit this, I've said this, the problem I have with my hypothesis of what I call the 1903, which is not, I'm not saying they called themselves that, folks. That's a year connected to this Tesla story about building an airship that this secret, mysterious, unidentified group wanted to take to Mars. That's why I call them the 1903. And you're right. It seems like after 1903, their presence or any evidence or suggestion, mere suggestion of their presence, disappeared. So I honestly don't know how to answer that, because I argue that you can see the Nimza thread woven right into the Third Reich. Okay. And I talk about that in the books, and I've talked about it in other discussions as well. But as far as the American group that I suspect, I don't know. I don't know what happened to them. Citizen Quasar, Walter, your sensor ran me off. Good night. Hey, Citizen Quasar, what? Okay, take back your thumbs up and piss off, okay? I'm really not in the mood for a goddamn snark because your question didn't get answered. And if you got booted, it's because you said something unacceptable for the censor, okay? My patience only goes so far with idiotic behavior. So, fine. You're welcome here if you want to be here. If you're going to be an ass, you're probably going to get censored. You might get booted. But lose the tude. Anyway. Brian Evans, underground bunkers in Europe are huge. Yeah, they are. See, that's evidence. Michael Woods asks, Walter Bosley, where do you believe the ships were? As I said, they were constructed in barns and probably in caves and tunnels. I don't think it's a big mystery as to where they were constructed. At least there's been no mystery about that popping up. And I'm not sorry, folks, that I showed a little attitude there with Citizen Quasar. Okay, he's had attitude since I first noticed him in here in the past, and I don't care for that Karen type whiny butt to the manager type stuff. Okay, if you're saying stuff that's going to get you censored or booted, don't say that stuff. And if you don't like that, I don't know what to tell you. I like civility here. Okay. Fair Jade asks, what was the gist of Joshua's take on the subject that you were hoping to discuss? I don't have that particular book yet, so it's been hard for me to follow along. Just the idea that the dead loved ones or people who have passed on have something very, very integral. I'm getting that word wrong. I'm sorry. They play some type of significant role in the UFO phenomenon. Okay. And it is the bottom of the hour. I got a message from my friend Craig Googles. um, I'm sorry. Go back to that last question. I was in the middle. What was the gist of Joshua saying that? Yeah. So basically, what was, and I wanted to get into more of the specifics that are in the chapter UFOs and the Dead, chapter 13 of Joshua Cutchin's Ecology of Souls. I wanted to, an expression of ideas or differences of opinion. It's fine. It's just that I feel like I kind of shortchanged and gypped the audience because they were expecting a discussion on that, and it ended up not being that. So I want to emphasize that my disappointment is not in, whether she and I agree on, the concepts in there. I thought it was interesting enough for us to discuss from our different perspectives. And I thought that was my disappointment, is I thought that would happen, and it didn't. So my fault. I should have steered things and kept it on track, and I didn't. Okay, folks, it is Sam R.I. gets the last question of the night. Walters, what are your opinion on the elongated skulls? Well, yeah, there are real elongated skulls that people go see. I'm not an expert on that. There is evidence in many cases that it was human manipulation in infancy. You can't throw that out with any bathwater. But then there are the other cases where there's no obvious evidence of that. So, what were these people with these weird skull shapes? I think the jury's still out on that, and therefore I don't know definitively what to say about it. So anyway, well, folks, it is the 90-minute mark, and I think I've said enough for the evening. 90 minutes of Walter Bosley is enough. Have to make part 2. Yes, Brian. Yeah, definitely. So I thank you all for coming. Those of you in the live chat, those of you watching it live, and those of you watching this recorded. I hope you find it interesting. This is the new format. I'm going 90 minutes. I'm going at this time that I go. It will change as I see fit, and I'll work with our webmeister Malia to make that happen and conducive to what works for you guys, the audience, as well. So anyway, I got sidetracked real quick. There was a glitch with Giza Death Star 1. That's all fixed. It's back out there again. This week, I'm working on getting not one, but 2 books out. The Book of Werewolves by Sabine Baring Gold, the edition that Todd Wood and I have put together. And Giza Death Star 2. So look for those being released this week. And Giza Death Star 3 will follow very shortly after, because Dr. Farrell is working on, well, I'll let him tell you what he's working on. But I gotta get these out there for your enjoyment. And thank you, Masters Maniac Mexico. Thanks, Max Lytle. And if I think of anything else I have to announce, I'll do an interim little report. But thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next week. Have a good night.